CBS News.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
You can't get answers in a tweet on Face the Nation. We try to separate the noise from the news. You need to be able to have an actual
We'd like to see the pause extended because what it has enabled, first and foremost, is hostages being released, coming home, being reunited with their families.
He is a serial fraudster. There is no sense that George Santos should have ever been elected.
I personally have real reservations about doing this. I'm concerned.
Chaos follows him. You know I'm right. Chaos follows him everywhere he goes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Qatar says an American is expected to be among a group of hostages released by Hamas today. 9 other people were also on a list of hostages expected to be freed on this, the 6th day of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The Israeli Defense Forces say 2 additional Israeli hostages were let go. Talks are being held in Qatar to try and further extend the pause in fighting. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano joins us now from Tel Aviv, Israel. Lilia, thank you so much for your time. Can you walk us through what we know about the status of this 6th group of hostages?
Good evening, Major. Well, we have learned that now the process of handing the hostages from Hamas to the hands of the Red Cross is already underway. What tends to happen, what we've been seeing over the multiple nights since these hostage releases began, is they are handed from Hamas to the Red Cross. They go into those Red Cross trucks. We expect tonight that there are 10 Israeli hostages. Some of those have dual nationalities, including a Dutch child, Germans, and of course the one American that you mentioned, that's Liat Benin. We spoke with her family earlier, her father and her sister. Her sister traveled from Portland, Oregon. They're eagerly, anxiously awaiting her return, of course, but they say that this reunion that they're expecting will happen tonight will be bittersweet because her husband Aviv is still being held hostage. So once we're awaiting on the images. We tend to receive the images live as they go from those Red Cross trucks across the border from Egypt into Israel, where the IDF receives them. Some of them are going directly to the hospital, or everybody goes to the hospital. Some have been having to go to hospitals more urgently than others, but families are waiting in multiple hospitals here in Tel Aviv. We also understand, and we also talked to family members of another family who expects a reunion tonight, and that is Raya Rotem, the mother of Ilah Rotem. You might know the story, our audience might have heard the story. This is the mother and daughter who had been separated just days before the 13-year-old daughter was released. The daughter was released on Saturday. She was released along with her friend, Emily Hand. Many have seen our interviews and multiple interviews with Emily's father, Tom Hand. One of the reasons why Saturday's delay, or why there was a delay Saturday in handing over the hostages, was because parents, according to the deal between Hamas and Israel, with the U.S. and Qatar, as you said, as intermediators, as well as Egypt, is because parents were supposed to stay together with their children. So having released a child without a parent was a bit of a sore point there. Eventually they were released, and we're learning tonight, at least from the family, that they expect that Raya, Ilah's mother, will also be among those released. There's 5 children, 5 adults.
Lily, I'm so glad you went through that process, because this is an enormously delicate diplomatic, military, and journalistic exercise. A name on a list offers encouragement to families, but until there is absolute confirmation, meaning they've been handed over and then rehanded over to the Israelis, and there's absolute confirmation, nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. And that's the state we find this story in currently, correct?
That's correct, Major. What we are hearing even from the families is they are waiting for a number of calls. They first get a call that their family members are on the list. That is a list that generally the Israeli government receives the day before the release. Once those names are on the list, that the Israeli government corroborates them, then they let the family know. And there's a whole procedure that goes into play. As I mentioned, the sister of one of the hostages came from Portland. She just arrived today. So that means that she got the call yesterday that she might be on the list, arrived today. The family waits. And then, some of them will give media interviews. Fortunately, we got to talk to Liat's family. This is the American hostage. But her father told us the moment we get the phone call that we're waiting while in the hospital, that she has already made it across the border, not just from Gaza into Egypt, but from Egypt into Israel. That's when we stop talking to you, because that's when we are she's in the hands of Israel. We know she's safe, and we turn the page and we focus on her well-being. And this has been the case for most families. Of course, many of them, because the public wants to know how they're doing, have given interviews afterwards. But of course, the sole focus for those families tonight, receiving their loved ones, is that they're okay, and listening and taking a cue from them as to what they need, both health, mental health, being heard, and waiting for those stories to emerge about what life was like in captivity.
The United States is heavily involved in these negotiations, which, as you mentioned, really involve Egypt, Hamas, Qatar, Israel. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke earlier today about efforts to extend the ceasefire and possibly achieve more hostage releases. Let's take a quick listen.
Look, we'd like to see the pause extended, because what it has enabled, first and foremost, is hostages being released, coming home, being reunited with their families. It's also enabled us to surge humanitarian assistance into the people of Gaza who so desperately need it. So its continuation, by definition, means that more hostages would be coming home, more assistance would be getting in. So clearly, that's something we want.
Lilia, this is a fluid situation, of course. What is, as best you can describe for our audience, the status of those talks to extend the ceasefire?
What I can tell you, Major, is that all parties involved are all hands on deck. The pressure continues to increase. Look, right now, there is no more deal. The ceasefire is still set to end at 7 a.m. tomorrow unless there's a deal. We know that there are still enough women and children for the initial terms of the deal of these last 6 days to maintain. That means for every Israeli hostage Hamas gets, or for every Israeli hostage that Hamas releases, there are 3 Palestinian, up until now, majority or all have been women and children, released from Israeli jails. There's a great deal of pressure from everyone involved, as I mentioned. Secretary Blinken is going to be tomorrow in Tel Aviv and in the West Bank. The U.S. envoy is also meeting and joining the director of the CIA in all of those efforts. But just as that pressure is needed, the tension is high. Look, today we heard from Hamas that one of the families, the family that many have come to know as the red-haired babies, the Bibas family, apparently, according to Hamas, they claim that an Israeli strike killed the 2 babies. That's the 10-month-old, the youngest baby of all the hostages, and a 4-year-old, along with their mother, Sherry. And so Hamas is saying, we have proof of this. We can show the evidence. This is something that they told, a Hamas official told CBS News. We're also learning from this same Hamas official that Hamas is willing to turn in all of the hostages. That includes men and soldiers in exchange for every Palestinian prisoner. Of course, you can imagine that those terms are not going to be what Israel is going to accept. We also know that Israel has been saying all along, we're not ready to end the war until Hamas has been eradicated. And that means that whether it's tomorrow or more days can be bought, basically more time can be bought, they plan to come back and continue the fighting. Both sides have that intention so far. This as 6,000 children, according to the Hamas-run Health Ministry of Gaza, have been killed, along with a total of 14,000 people in the Gaza territory. And today in the West Bank, we've learned from the Palestinian Authorities' health ministry that 2 children, an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old, according to the ministry were killed by IDF soldiers. We have reached out to the IDF to confirm. We haven't heard back from them. But look, this is still very active. Perhaps the war is not hot at the moment. The strikes haven't been going back and forth as they had been. Of course, there's been a ceasefire also with Lebanon, which with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Things are quiet in a way, but the pressure, the tension is high, and we're still just hours away from the end of the ceasefire unless another deal is reached.
The fragile peace is exactly that, fragile and only momentary. Lilia Luciano, thank you so much. House of Representatives is set to vote on a resolution seeking to expel New York Republican Congressman George Santos. That could happen as early as this week. If that resolution is successful, Santos would become the 6th lawmaker in the history of the House to be expelled. Santos, for what it's worth, said he thinks it's likely this will happen. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now. Scott, is it likely that George Santos will join that very small list of members of the House expelled by the body?
Major, his colleagues who are championing this bill to expel Santos are brimming with confidence. They're overflowing with confidence. They believe they have swung enough votes from the prior vote to expel Santos to make it not only the 2/3 vote they need, but beyond that as well. It's Republicans who have swung from no to yes on this, but it's also Democrats who've done so, who said they were going to keep their powder dry earlier in this process. But it's that House Ethics Committee report released earlier this month, which alleged, among other things, Major, that Santos used campaign money to surround himself with luxury. Botox treatments, spa packages, vacations, for his rent, for fashion, for luxury stores, and all of those findings parallel with the feds continue to allege that he engaged in conspiracy and fraud. He ripped off his donors. He even took some of their credit card numbers and used them on himself. It's hit a critical mass, Major. It's just a question now whether that vote happens tomorrow or early Friday.
And what has new Speaker Mike Johnson had to say about both the vote and his thoughts as to whether or not it should succeed?
Now, he has raised the prospect this could be a Friday vote. And that's not insignificant, Major. You know this as well as anybody from covering the Hill. Friday vote turnout is little less than vibrant compared to other days. And potentially holding it on a Friday could change the turnout numbers. Not that the likelihood of passage is compromised here, but maybe some people can skip a vote they don't want to take. It's one possibility. But also the Speaker has expressed some concern about this, making the argument that this may set a dangerous precedent, that there could be a tit for tat that follows any expulsion, the 6th ever in U.S. history. Yeah, this is history, Major, but this has already been a groundbreaking Congress where unexpected things happen, and there has been some concern about retaliation and the mucking up of the House floor with more of these censures and expulsion resolutions and impeachment arguments.
But for the audience's benefit, Scott, expulsion is quite different than censure. And yes, there has been a conversation, a rather lively one, about whether censuring has sort of run amok. But expulsion is still, it seems to me, a serious matter. And lawmakers were in one place on this a month and a half ago, and they've moved to another place. So it looks like they're giving it some due thought.
This is a different level, absolutely. And some of the supporters of this measure, which includes, by the way, New York Republicans who say they're sick of talking about George Santos and being bogged down by George Santos, they tell me that this is a one-of-a-kind case, which requires that very high measure of expulsion. It's the New York Republicans who've been ginning up interest in this, and a few Democrats, to be fair. Robert Garcia of California, Dan Goldman of New York were there on the floor trying to expedite this thing yesterday, and they have started a clock that you can almost hear ticking off the marble, set to expire tomorrow or Friday.
Across the Capitol, senators are pushing to try to end Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville's hold on military confirmations, that is to say, pending promotions in the United States military. Walk us through where we are on this.
Yeah, the Senate Rules Committee has set the table to do an end run around Tommy Tuberville to end this hold he's put on military confirmations. I talked to one senator today about this, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, who said if Senator Tuberville is trying to make a point, he's made the point over the past few months, and it's time to yield. You get in the sense, talking to a number of senators here, Major, that this end run they're preparing may just be leverage to convince Senator Tuberville to yield or back down. And We're going to get to a pretty critical point here in the next few days where that decision has to be made. Is he going to back down, or will the Senate do something that is so uncommon, change its own rules, in essence, to circumvent him?
Scott McFarland with all the important details. Thank you so very much. Nikki Haley is arguing the country, maybe even Republicans, do not need Donald Trump and his, quote, chaos back in the White House. The latest on her campaign and the Republican field. You are streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
Welcome back to America Decides. For whatever it might be worth, and we'll try to figure this out, Nikki Haley is having a moment. She's making her case to voters in New Hampshire, telling them, among other things, former President Trump was the right choice for the country in 2016, but now the country should move on. Let's listen.
Chaos follows him everywhere he goes. And with a country divided like we are, and distracted, by the way, and a world that's got threats pointed all at America, we can't afford any of that chaos.
Robert Costa and Nydia Cavazos join us now. Robert, as you well know, is CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Nydia is a CBS News campaign reporter following the Haley campaign. Robert, this is a moment for Nikki Haley, it so appears. Is it a meaningful one?
She has a long way to go. She has to still make a coherent case to voters and to donors that she has a viable path to the nomination to get through former President Trump. At this point, she has a moment in the context of the second tier of those in the polls.
Right.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Vivek Ramaswamy, the entrepreneur, Nikki Haley, Governor Burgum, among others. They're all competing to be seen as the second-place champion. Well, second-place champion doesn't get you the nomination.
No, it doesn't.
So she has the Americans for Prosperity Action endorsement, which has a connection to the Koch network. She's getting some support from Jamie Dimon, the business executive, and others who are saying, let's look at her. They don't love Trump. But at this time, the Republican Party, I've been out there on the trail, is still a party that's interested in Trump, likes Trump. Yes, they buy her case that he's chaotic, but many of them embrace the chaos.
Right. And it seems to me, Robert, it's worth pointing out that whatever else Nikki Haley might have achieved, she's at least positioned in a way that she wasn't 6 months ago to take advantage of something if it breaks her way. And that's the first thing you have to do in a presidential crowded primary field. Put yourself in a decent position. It seems she's at least achieved that, which others in the field haven't.
We'll see. I'm skeptical about
I'm not saying
everyone
that she's
who's
going to do anything.
Right, I know, right.
But compared to where DeSantis was 5 months ago, would you have said Haley would be having a moment now? You probably would have said maybe not.
So she's having a moment now, and it's almost December. So does DeSantis stay in the race, as we expect, and have a moment when he does well in Iowa? Does he win Iowa? Does he come in second in Iowa?
Beat
and that's the
expectations.
first contest. So if DeSantis gets a bounce in Iowa, that puts pressure on Haley to have a strong New Hampshire. But Chris Christie's still in the race. He's not showing any sign of getting out. So for her to get that kind of traditional Republican vote in New Hampshire, having Christie in the race makes it difficult. DeSantis getting a bounce in Iowa will make it difficult. That puts a lot of emphasis on her home state of South Carolina further in the calendar.
Nydia, you're there in New Hampshire around events with Nikki Haley. What are you hearing from those who are attending those events, and is she changing minds?
Yes, well, the reality here is that Donald Trump continues to lead. He continues to be the front runner, and it's himself that's really resonating with Republican voters. But now when it comes to the Republican voters that are attending Nikki Haley's event, there seems to be some sort of Donald Trump fatigue. So this is resonating with the voters, Republican and independent voters who come to Nikki Haley's town halls, because most of them also tend to be undecided and they're still shopping around. They know for a fact that they used to support Donald Trump, but they're sort of tired of his chaos, of the drama, of the legal cases, and they're just looking forward to having some sort of order, not only in their country, but in their world. So to a certain extent, Nikki Haley's message on Donald Trump and the chaos and the drama that follows him resonates with the voters who are showing up and who are in the midst of picking their presidential choice.
But in New Hampshire on the ground, does it still feel to you that Trump remains the very heavy favorite?
It certainly does. And despite the fact that we get mixed reactions from the crowds attending various campaign stops, not only for Haley, but also for DeSantis, and this is across Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, we know for a fact that many acknowledge that Donald Trump continues to be the front runner, but they still have some sort of hope that there might be some time for them to change their minds and really listen in. And they're also hoping that Nikki Haley can continue to gain some momentum and really narrow that gap. So it's mixed feelings that we're getting here in New Hampshire from voters. They just remain hopeful that there might be an alternative to Donald Trump.
Robert, you talked to the Trump campaign, so do I. They sort of laugh at all this. Like, look at the numbers, folks. The numbers don't lie. The numbers, if anything, keep showing more support, not less, for the former president. And this thing, from their perspective, at least as I gather it, to their minds, is nearly over.
Well, they're laughing, but they're spending money.
Sure.
When Trump's on the air, and when you're on the air spending money on advertising, that means you're taking the competition seriously to some extent. And if he doesn't come out of Iowa, Trump, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, with a commanding lead of delegates and momentum, then this is a race. It's a race that will go through Super Tuesday. Maybe 2 or 3 of the rivals hang on. They maybe could take it all the way to the convention. So Trump, yes, he's ahead in the polls, but if he doesn't get that big jolt out of the early contest, there's a reason a lot of them will stay in. And donors are saying now they want an extended race at the very least.
And that key aspect of momentum coming out of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, vital for Trump, because after that comes not only Super Tuesday and lots of other contests, but court battles that will be very real and have an effect not only on his schedule, but on the public imagery around him.
I'm not so sure about Iowa. I mean, there's never been a nominee Huckabee, nominee Santorum, or nominee Cruz. They all won Iowa. They didn't win the nomination. If he stumbles in New Hampshire and Christie and Haley are able to eat into Trump's coalition there, and he stumbles in South Carolina because Haley comes into her home state and does well, all while the trial's playing out in Washington on January 6th. It could raise some questions about his electability. But I've covered Trump since 2010, 2011, in the political world at least. He's going to come at you with everything.
Everything.
Assume nothing about how the norms of politics works. You've written numerous books about Trump. He's going to attack mercilessly.
And he has state parties and a national party more in his camp than it was in 2016, a structural advantage that is often but should never be overlooked. Robert Costa, Nadia Cavazos, thank you so very much. President Biden is out west touting, among other things, his economic policies. We will take you to Pueblo, Colorado. That's next. You are streaming America Decides.
The grief of losing a child is immense. You can't breathe.
After decades of the war on drugs, things have only gotten worse.
Every shipment of fentanyl is a ticking time bomb.
50 times more powerful than heroin.
CBS Reports goes deep into Mexico.
What is your role in the Sinaloa cartel?
To find out why the cartels keep getting stronger and wealthier.
This is a war, but we're not fighting it. Our citizens are dying.
Funding Cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
This is CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
He started out as a fun-loving party boy, but the alcohol got the better of him. What I envisioned was him being in some sort of medical facility. I just thought, what a great candidate for them to learn about the results of alcoholism and what it does to a body. But his body was sold to the military, specifically used as a crash test dummy in a simulated Humvee explosion. I was devastated. I had the box. I don't know if they were his ashes or not. I just held it as tight as I could, and I just told him how sorry I was.
Body Brokers, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe storms and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last
the 7th straight day of terrifying weather.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Leat Benin is safe in Egypt. She's crossed the border. I talked with her mother and father. They're very appreciative, and things are moving well. She'll soon be home with their 3 children.
That was President Biden just moments ago before boarding Air Force One. He was confirming that an American hostage was in fact part of the 16 who crossed into Egypt, underscoring a couple of things. Not only the president's direct personal involvement in the status of hostages generally and Americans specifically, but also how this story, the Israeli-Hamas war, continues to follow the president wherever he goes. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Pueblo, Colorado. Ed, you've been following the fast-moving developments all day. Catch us up on the day for the president.
He spent most of his day here in Denver, where we are, Major, and got briefings this morning from his aides before heading down to Pueblo for this afternoon event. Today, a great reminder
of how the president and the presidency can be pulled in multiple directions at once. He's here to raise money for his reelection campaign, to tout his legislative work, to troll a House Republican, Lauren Boebert, who was down in her district. Remember, she only won her reelection last year by 546 votes, and Democrats would like to grab that seat next year, which is why he came. But he was also closely monitoring the situation all day with these hostages, and there, as he gets on the plane to fly home, can confirm that, in fact, at least one American is released. Tonight, the Secretary of State is en route. The CIA director is in the region. The top State Department official for hostage affairs is also in the Middle East, trying to continue to get the Israelis, Hamas, to continue the pause and show the world that the United States is hearing the calls for and the concerns about humanitarian aid in Gaza, and ideally some kind of an extended ceasefire to allow those hostages to be released before Israel continues its campaign.
And Ed, more broadly, that conversation about the ceasefire is in part of a conversation broadly going on within the Democratic Party about what those who are Jewish Democrats and those who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause say about each other, feel about each other, and it's even manifesting some hurt feelings among Democrats in Colorado. True?
That's right. Our colleagues at CBS Colorado were calling this out last night, that legislators in public, in chambers, have been yelling at each other over issues like this. And there are deep divisions in a state that has several prominent Jewish Democrats. But one lawmaker telling CBS Colorado, given the concerns about this and how certain Democrats have been behaving around it, she doesn't necessarily feel at home in the party anymore. So while the president gets pressure from Democrats across the country, while he was greeted by protesters at his hotel last night concerned about this, that example here in Denver among state legislators is an example of how this really is roiling the Democratic Party at all levels across the country. And it's something the president will continue to confront back in Washington.
Allow me to correct myself. Ed O'Keefe coming to us from Denver, Colorado. Thank you so very much. That does it for today. You are streaming CBS News.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone